Imagine this. The greatest military genius the world has ever seen stands on a dusty African plain. Behind him, an army of 40,000 men, 80 war elephants, and 17 years of unbroken victory. He has crossed mountains that could not be crossed. He has destroyed armies that could not be destroyed. He has made Rome weep, made Rome bleed, made Rome beg. And now, for the first time in his life, Hannibal Barca is afraid. Across the field stands a Roman general half his age, a man who learned everything he knows from studying Hannibal's own battles, a man who has come to Africa not to defend Rome, but to end Carthage forever. Zama, 202 BC, the battle that will decide whether Rome or Carthage rules the world. This is not a battle. This is a student come to kill his teacher. For 17 years, Hannibal had been death itself, and he had marched an army across the Alps in winter, a feat everyone said was impossible. He had lost half his men, most of his horses, and nearly all his elephants to the cold. And then he had descended into Italy like a plague. At the Trebia River, he had slaughtered a Roman army in a trap so perfect it became a textbook. At Lake Trasimene, he had ambushed another army in the fog, killing 15,000 Romans in 3 hours. The consul himself died with a Gallic spear through his chest. And then came Cannae. Cannae, the word that made Roman mothers weep for a generation. 70,000 Roman soldiers marched onto that field. By sunset, nearly 50,000 were dead. Hannibal had surrounded the largest army Rome had ever assembled and butchered it like cattle in a pen, and the ground was so thick with bodies that survivors had to crawl over the dead to escape. Rome lost more men in a single afternoon than America lost in the entire Vietnam War. After Cannae, Hannibal's officers begged him to march on Rome itself. "In 5 days," one general promised, "you will dine in the capital." Hannibal refused. He knew Rome's walls were strong. He knew his siege equipment was weak. He chose to wait for Rome to surrender. Rome did not surrender. And that single decision, that moment of hesitation, would cost Hannibal everything. But the real question was not why Hannibal waited. The real question was, who would be insane enough to face him? For 17 years, every Roman general who fought Hannibal had died or been humiliated, and the best commanders in the Republic had thrown themselves against the Carthaginian wall and shattered like waves against rock. Then came Publius Cornelius Scipio. He was 25 years old when he demanded command of Rome's armies in Spain. The Senate laughed. Spain was a death sentence. Carthage controlled it absolutely. 2 Roman commanders, Scipio's own father and uncle, had already died there. The young man did not care. He saw something no one else could see. He had been at Cannae. He had watched Hannibal's trap close around the Roman army. He had somehow escaped the slaughter. And in the blood and chaos of that day, he had not learned fear. He had learned how to win. Scipio understood what the Senate refused to accept. Hannibal was not invincible. Hannibal was predictable. Every battle followed the same pattern. Feint, envelope, crush. Hannibal used the enemy's aggression against them. He let them charge, then surrounded them, then destroyed them. The solution was simple in theory, impossible in practice. Do not charge. Do not let him dictate the battle. Attack where he is weak, not where he is strong. And most importantly, do not fight Hannibal at all. Fight Carthage. While every other Roman commander obsessed over killing Hannibal in Italy, Scipio looked at a map and saw the truth. Hannibal was a sword, but the hand holding that sword was in Africa. Cut off the hand, and the sword falls. In 4 years, Scipio conquered all of Spain. He destroyed Carthaginian armies, captured Carthaginian cities, and turned Carthaginian allies into Roman friends. He did it using Hannibal's own tactics, the flanking maneuvers, the cavalry ambushes, the psychological warfare, and the student was learning from the master. But the final exam would be held in Africa. and only one of them would survive it. In 204 BC, Scipio did what no Roman had dared for 14 years. He invaded Africa. The Senate screamed that it was madness. Hannibal was still in Italy with a veteran army. To send Rome's best legions overseas was to leave the homeland undefended. What if Hannibal marched on Rome while Scipio played conqueror in Africa? Scipio answered with cold logic. If I threaten Carthage, Carthage will recall Hannibal to defend it. The war will end in Africa, not Italy. The Senate gave him permission. Barely. He landed near Utica with 26,000 men and no elephants. Carthage immediately sent armies to crush him, and Scipio did something that would have horrified traditional Roman commanders. He attacked at night. Roman armies did not fight at night. Night battles were chaos, impossible to control, certain to end in disaster. But Scipio had studied Hannibal. He knew that surprise was worth more than daylight. He burned 2 Carthaginian camps in a single night. 40,000 enemy soldiers died in their beds or fled into the darkness. It was a massacre so complete that Carthage panicked. They sent messengers to Italy. Bring Hannibal home. Hannibal received the order in 203 BC. For 17 years, he had lived, fought, and bled on Italian soil. He had won every major battle. He had killed over 300,000 Roman soldiers. He had come closer to destroying Rome than any enemy before or since. And now he was being recalled like a servant. The sources say he wept as his ships left Italy. Or perhaps he cursed. Or perhaps he simply stared at the shrinking coastline and calculated his odds. He was 53 years old. He had spent more than half his life at war. His army was tired, depleted, far from the force that had crossed the Alps. Many of his veterans had died or deserted over the years. The soldiers he would bring to Africa were good, but not great. And waiting for him was a Roman general who had never lost a battle. Hannibal knew the mathematics of doom. He had written those equations for others many times. Now he would have to solve them himself. The lion was going home to die. The two armies met near a town called Zama in October of 202 BC. Hannibal had approximately 40,000 men. His infantry was a patchwork: Carthaginian citizens, Numidian allies, mercenaries from a dozen nations, and his precious Italian veterans, and the only troops he truly trusted. His cavalry was weak, only 4,000 horsemen against Scipio's 6,000, and he had 80 war elephants. The elephants were supposed to be his advantage. In previous battles, these beasts had terrified Roman horses and shattered Roman formations. A charging elephant was a living tank, 5 tons of muscle and fury that could trample a century of men in seconds. But Scipio had prepared something special for the elephants. He had trained his men to open lanes in their formations. When the elephants charged, the Romans would simply step aside, creating corridors for the beasts to run through harmlessly. Then the velites, light infantry with javelins, would attack the elephants from the sides, driving them mad with pain. It was simple. It was brilliant. It was pure Hannibal, and Hannibal knew nothing about it. The night before battle, something extraordinary happened. Hannibal requested a meeting with Scipio. The two greatest generals of the age met between the armies, accompanied only by interpreters. What was said in that conversation has been debated for 2,000 years. The ancient sources give us versions, but no one knows the truth. Hannibal reportedly offered peace. Carthage would surrender Spain, surrender the Mediterranean islands, surrender everything Rome had already taken. In exchange, Rome would leave Africa alone. Scipio refused. Perhaps he said, "You should have offered this before you invaded Italy." Perhaps he said, "The Senate will not accept." Perhaps he said nothing at all, simply shaking his head at the old lion trying to negotiate his way out of the cage. What is certain is that when the meeting ended, both men knew that only the sword could decide. Tomorrow, one of them would watch his army die. But the true horror of Zama had not yet revealed itself. Dawn on the day of battle. Hannibal arranged his army in 3 lines. The first line, mercenaries, Gauls, and Ligurians, expendable troops meant to tire the Romans. The second line, Carthaginian citizens and African levies, mediocre soldiers, but numerous. The third line, his Italian veterans, the only men who had never lost a battle under his command. The elephant stood in front of everything, 80 grey mountains waiting to charge. Across the field, Scipio had arranged his legions in a formation that looked conventional, 3 lines of infantry, cavalry on the wings. But hidden in that arrangement was a trap worthy of Hannibal himself, and the battle began with screaming. Hannibal ordered the elephants forward. 80 beasts charged across the plain, tusks gleaming, earth shaking beneath their feet. Roman trumpets blared in response, not retreat signals, but a cacophony designed to confuse and frighten the animals. The elephants wavered. Some turned back into their own lines, trampling Carthaginian cavalry. Others ran through the lanes that Scipio's infantry had opened, thundering harmlessly past the legions and into the empty space behind. Roman velites chased them, hurling javelins, driving them away from the battle entirely. In 5 minutes, Hannibal's greatest weapon had destroyed his own cavalry and accomplished nothing. The real battle could now begin. The infantry lines crashed together. Hannibal's mercenaries fought hard. They had nowhere to run, but the Roman legions were better armed, better trained, better fed. Step by step, the first line crumbled. The mercenaries began to retreat toward the second line, and here, Hannibal made a decision that shocked his own men. He ordered the second line to hold position, not to advance and help the mercenaries, not to open ranks and let them retreat, just to stand there with leveled spears. The mercenaries found themselves trapped between Roman swords in front and Carthaginian spears behind. They did not retreat anymore. They turned and attacked the second line. For several chaotic minutes, Carthaginian fought Carthaginian, while the Romans watched in disbelief. Hannibal had sacrificed his first line deliberately. He was feeding men to the slaughter to tire the Roman infantry. It was monstrous. It was brilliant. It was Hannibal. When the chaos ended, the mercenaries were dead, and the Roman first line was exhausted, their swords dull with blood, their arms heavy with killing. They had won, but they had paid. Now they faced the second line, and behind that, the Italian veterans, the men who had never been defeated. Scipio needed to reorganize. He needed time, and time was something Hannibal intended to deny him. But Scipio had not forgotten the oldest lesson of war. Cavalry wins battles. Infantry only holds the line. While the infantry slaughtered each other in the center, the cavalry battle had already been decided. Scipio's Numidian allies, horsemen who had once served Carthage, and Roman cavalry had swept Hannibal's weak horsemen from the field. Hannibal had 4,000 cavalry, Scipio had 6,000, and his were better. The Carthaginian cavalry fled, the Roman cavalry pursued, and the battlefield fell silent on the wings. This was the moment of decision. Scipio could press forward now, throw his tired infantry against Hannibal's veterans, and probably lose. Or he could wait, reorganize his lines, and pray that his cavalry returned in time. He chose to wait. The legions pulled back. Wounded men were dragged to safety. Fresh soldiers moved to the front. The 3 Roman lines merged into one long formation, ready to meet Hannibal's final charge. Across the field, Hannibal watched. He knew what Scipio was doing. He knew his only chance was to attack now, before the cavalry returned. He ordered the veterans forward. The third line advanced. These were the men who had crossed the Alps with Hannibal, who had survived Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae, who had lived in enemy territory for 17 years and never once been conquered. They marched in perfect formation, shields locked, spears level. They did not scream or shout. They came in silence, and their silence was more terrifying than any war cry. The Roman line braced. The collision was unlike anything that had come before. This was not tired men against exhausted men. This was the best of Carthage against the best of Rome, and both sides knew that the war would end in the next hour. The killing was mechanical. No fancy maneuvers, no tactical surprises. Just two walls of bronze and iron grinding against each other, each trying to push the other into the dirt. Men fell. Others stepped forward to take their place. The line wavered, held, pushed back, held again. Neither side would break. And then the trumpet sounded, and the Roman cavalry had returned. Massinissa's Numidians and Laelius's Roman horsemen had finished pursuing the fleeing Carthaginian cavalry. Now they wheeled back toward the battlefield and saw Hannibal's veterans locked in combat with the legions. They did not hesitate. 6,000 horsemen slammed into the rear of Hannibal's line. The veterans tried to turn, tried to form square, tried to do something, anything, but there was no time. Cavalry hit them from behind, while infantry pressed from the front. The formation that had never broken began to crack. Men who had survived impossible campaigns for 17 years died in minutes. The line collapsed not from weakness, but from mathematics. Attacked from two directions, any army will break. Hannibal saw it happening. He saw his veterans dying around him. He saw the Roman cavalry cutting through his reserve. He saw 16 years of war ending in a single afternoon. And for the first time in his life, Hannibal Barca fled. He escaped with a handful of horsemen. Behind him, 20,000 Carthaginians lay dead or dying. The Roman casualties were perhaps 1,500. It was an annihilation as complete as Cannae, but with the roles reversed. The student had become the master. Scipio had done what no Roman general had managed in 17 years. He had defeated Hannibal in open battle. He had used Hannibal's own tactics, the feint, the sacrifice, the cavalry hammer, and he had executed them better. Carthage surrendered within weeks. The terms were crushing. Carthage lost Spain, lost all overseas territories, lost its fleet, lost its war elephants, lost its right to wage war without Roman permission. It paid a tribute that would drain its treasury for 50 years. And Hannibal? Rome demanded that Hannibal be surrendered for execution. Carthage refused, barely. The greatest general in their history was allowed to live, but his power was broken. He spent his remaining years in exile, hunted by Roman assassins, selling his military genius to any king who would shelter him. He eventually took poison rather than be captured. His last words reportedly, "Let us relieve the Romans of the anxiety they have so long experienced, since they think it too tedious to wait for an old man's death." Scipio returned to Rome as a living god. They gave him a triumph. They gave him a new name, Africanus. They gave him statues and songs, and the eternal gratitude of a republic that had nearly died. But Zama was not just a victory, it was a transformation. Before Zama, Rome was one power among many. After Zama, Rome was the power. The Mediterranean became a Roman lake. The Republic became an empire in all but name. And Carthage? Carthage survived for another 50 years, a shadow of its former self, until Rome decided that even shadows were dangerous. In 146 BC, Roman legions would return. They would burn Carthage to the ground. They would sell every man, woman, and child into slavery. They would, according to legend, salt the earth so that nothing would ever grow there again. But all of that began at Zama. All of that began when a young Roman general looked at a tired old lion and thought, "I can take him." And he was right. 2,000 years later, military academies still teach Zama. And they teach it as the moment when the student surpasses the teacher, when patience defeats genius, when a new power rises by absorbing the lessons of the power it destroys. Hannibal was perhaps the greatest tactical mind in human history. He won every battle he ever fought, except the last one, and the last one was the only one that mattered. Scipio was not a genius. He was a student. He watched, he learned, he adapted, and when his moment came, he was ready. The lesson of Zama is simple and brutal. It does not matter how many battles you win if you lose the one that counts. Hannibal won for 17 years. Scipio won once. Once was enough.